Hello everyone and welcome back to a short reviews video for February 2022. This is a monthly segment where I basically mention those releases where I didn't feel I had that much to say in order to put them in a full-length review. So all of those albums and EPs are just being brought together in this section right here. Some of those albums I do recommend to you as they might be more to your liking, others I don't really feel that they're that much worth your time. But with all that being said, let's just jump straight into the video. Now I was sort of anticipating this brand new album of Yeule, even if I wasn't really that much impressed with her previous album, but I definitely feel that this one has some really interesting elements to it in regards to how glitchy the vocals are, and it definitely manages to give this vibe of like a glitch pop release performed by an android or like a mysterious entity. It succeeds on creating this mysterious and dystopian vibe behind it, which in my opinion felt really complimenting with some of the very first songs. As the album progresses though, I ended up somewhat losing my interest and not really feeling that it's a consistently solid release. I like that this album also ends up going into a few different approaches and changing genres a little bit, but not to the point where it felt like groundbreaking for the release. In regards to Spotify, you can also find the 4-hour track that they released the previous year, which in my opinion, I don't really feel that it's that much worth your time. I didn't listen to the entirety of it, but just from what I've listened out of it, I don't really think that it's that much of an interesting ambient piece. So if you're gonna listen to this album, just stick with the other songs, and who knows, maybe you might find this more appealing to you. I certainly think that this album is intriguing, but not something that I would possibly return to. This is one of those very lengthy albums of Prurient. I think that this is possibly like the closest we have with what Prurient did a few years ago with the album Rainbow Mirror, which had those really lengthy drum pieces with a few noise elements attached to them, and it's kind of the same case over here with Creationist, although I would say that this album ends up being a bit more harsh and a bit more abrasive, which I do appreciate, and I feel that there are some really interesting elements over here. There are some really solid textures, there are some really cool noise portions, and I feel that it definitely manages on some occasions to capture this dark and grim aesthetic, which is something that is really usual with Prurient works. I feel that the overall mixing though is a bit low, and I would like for some of the tracks to have a bit of a more intensity to it. I understand that possibly the point of this project is to be somewhat more soothing to the ear, however I feel that some of the harsher portions would be much more complimented if they were somewhat more intense, as it somewhat feels like it's lacking of something all the time. And also it is a really lengthy album, and I feel that there are a few occasions over here where the album does miss and just becomes kinda boring and forgettable. So I think it's an enjoyable project, but it's definitely not close to some of the greatest stuff we've heard out of Prurient's catalog. I mean, obviously Korn in 2022 doesn't really sound like a thing that should happen. There is not that much of a relevance here, it's more of the same thing over and over. We've heard stuff like this many years ago done better by the same band as well. Still, it's not a bad album. I mean, when it comes to some of the singles, I actually ended up liking them. Beyond that point though, the rest of the album, it's just like another average nu metal album. There's not really that much to it beyond just that, honestly. I've never managed to get the appeal of Animal Collective. For me, Animal Collective is one of those bands where no matter how many times I've tried, I can't get into their music. Like, it's just not my thing. And I would say that it's the same case with this album over here. I didn't really enjoy it, it felt boring for me, it felt forgettable and uninteresting. That's just me though. I understand that it has its appeal, but it's certainly not for me. Zeal and Ardor are back with an album that had so many singles staging before the release of this thing, and listening to them I just felt that they were okay. But yeah, the thing with this album is that it feels like it's lacking some of the main elements that made the sound of Zeal and Ardor so appealing. Now, it is once again a bit of a unique album that goes into many different directions and combining many different sounds together, but it never really manages to capture the elements that made the previous albums so special. This album ends up feeling more safe and standard in some occasions, with not that much of a weirdness or expressive instrumentation to it. The production simply feels decent, and in my opinion, yeah, there's not really that much into this album. I was hoping for more, but I didn't really get it with this one. Saba, in my opinion, released a pretty solid hip-hop album. I've never really been that much into his works, but I feel that this is possibly the best thing he's put out. I really liked some of the elements and some of the approaches he took with the sound over here. I feel that some of the instrumentals are a bit decent, but for me, the greatest part about this album has to be the rapping. I feel that some of the flows and some of the deliveries were really good on this one. So yeah, I can't really say I'm amazed with the result, but it's certainly a pretty cool and decent album for what it does. The sound of Rolo Tomassi really changed over here, going into some more soothing directions and even combining elements of like shoegaze and dream pop, which is something that was teasing before with previous releases, but never to that extent. And I feel that in some occasions it actually makes for some really beautiful works with some really solid riffs, but it doesn't really have the elements that made previous Rolo Tomassi albums so exceptional. It's a bit lacking of intensity, even though it has intense moments, and I think that one of the good elements about this album has to do with the overall sound and production, which ends up having these really heavy tones. Beyond that, despite some cool ideas, I don't believe that it's the most complimenting sound for Rolo Tomassi. Author and Punisher has created some impressive custom machines, which look cool, the way they function is amazing, and the sounds they produce are also great. This has made him for me one of the most unique and one of the most intriguing musicians in the industrial and metal scene, especially in recent years. But when it comes to the music, especially in more recent years, it's just more of the same thing over and over again. And not just that, but feeling that in terms of sound it goes into some really basic and generic stuff that I don't end up really enjoying as much. So it's been a while since I've listened to Author and Punisher, so I got into this album after having lots of years to listen to his music, and I was like, maybe this one is gonna click with me after a long time, but I can't say that was the case. Now, this album might end up feeling a bit different compared to some of the previous stuff that he has created, but still for what it stands out as its own, it's a pretty one-dimensional and repetitive album. Many of the tracks end up offering some of the same elements over and over again, and the vocals are also not really my style. I don't personally feel that they particularly fit all that well with what the instrumentals do. So for me, this is another album out of Author and Punisher where I wasn't really that much impressed by it. Outside of the great machines behind the project, musically it's a bit disappointing for me. At this point, I don't really care for Oliver Tree's music at all. It's more of a one-trick pony, going more into acoustic and folk directions, especially recently. The vocal delivery and range is pretty annoying, and this album as a whole is kinda obnoxious. I'd say that the first half offers some of the worst material Oliver Tree has ever done. Fortunately, it kind of redeems itself with the second half offering some more interesting instrumentals and having a few catchier and more memorable choruses, but there's not really that much beyond that point. This album, in my opinion, it's not really worth your time. Oliver Tree's appeal has been long gone at this point. Mitski is back with a new album, and I haven't really been that much into Mitski's music. This one ends up going into a more of a synth pop direction and having more electronic elements to it. I don't really believe that this sound works that much well for her. I can't really say I was impressed by anything this album provided, from the mixing, from the instrumentals, from the deliveries. I just felt that this was an average album that didn't really manage to catch my attention in any single way. Avril Lavigne returns with Love Sucks, which feels like basically a throwback to a 2000 sound of pop punk and skate punk, which I believe that it's done nicely over here. It also might contain a few more modern approaches at times, but for the most part you get a really basic and average album that feels like someone trying to copy the sound of Avril Lavigne from the early 2000s works. It's not that bad. I mean, I ended up enjoying tracks like Cannonball, for example. I think that this is a really good song, but yeah, the album as a whole, I wasn't really feeling it. It's not my style, it's not my thing. I believe that Avril Lavigne has done some cool works in the past. This one is just, it's okay. Black Dresses go into sounds and genres that would certainly appeal to me I mean, there are so many elements about their sound that I really love, synth punk with electro-industrial and power noise and so many other combinations, which just sounds like something that I would enjoy. But so far from everything I've heard out of Black Dresses, I haven't really managed to invest that much into their works, and I need to listen more to their catalog because I know that there's something there. But in terms of this brand new album over here, I can't really say I found it just yet. I feel that the issue with this album is that it ends up being quite short. It's only 20 minutes long, and most of the tracks just feel like having a few interesting ideas to them, but not really extending them to a point where they would feel like fulfilling songs, outside of a few exceptions. Now, I really like the very first track. I like the aggression, the intensity, and how the distorted portions basically just distort anything else. I think that it's a really cool effect done in a really cool way. The thing is though that this is something we see with the rest of the album as we move forward, and even if it sounds cool, it's repeated a lot. It has this one element that it's repeated so many times, and I feel that this album could have approached this with a bit of a more variety. Still, for what it stands, I think that this is an intriguing project. It has elements that I like, but not to a point where I would say I'm impressed yet. I don't really know what happened with this new EP of Sevdaliza. I really like the very first song. I like the approaches that it took with the beat, with how soothing, dark and atmospheric it sounds. But the thing is that the rest of the EP goes into different directions and every single track feels different. But in my opinion, some of the approaches do not work as well. Like, what's with the third track? Why does this sound like a generic EDM song, like it's taken out of copyrighted free music material? I don't really understand it. I don't even get the remix of Oh My God, why is it here? Like, I believe that this EP had potential. I liked some of its elements, but there are also others that don't feel like Sevdaliza at all. So a bit mixed and somewhat indifferent with its release. I had much bigger expectations for this release. I believe that the second track is the only sort of nice example of an industrial techno track that would feel like pretty decent playing in a party of this style. In regards to anything else this EP provides though, it just goes into some kinda standard EBM directions at some occasions. It feels a bit monotone. I like some of the industrial soundscapes that it has, but beyond that, I don't really feel that the beats or the structures is anything all that interesting. So yeah, this EP, for me at least, felt a bit of like a lost potential. And that's all for the short reviews of February 2022. What's your opinion in any of those albums or EPs? Like them, dislike them, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.